On January 15, 1919, a steel tank in Boston's North End tore open without warning. It held over 2 million gallons of molasses. Seconds later, the streets turned into a moving wall of dark liquid that slammed into buildings and trapped people where they stood. When it was over, 21 people were dead and about 150 were injured. So how did something you picture in a kitchen become one of the strangest disasters in American history? It was a normal weekday around lunchtime, in a crowded neighborhood of homes, small shops, and narrow streets. The North End sat close to the working waterfront, and people were constantly moving through the area. An elevated train ran nearby, so rumbling sounds were common. But this sound kept growing and did not fade. People described a deep groan, then sharp cracking as rivets began popping. Some witnesses compared it to machine gun fire because it came in rapid bursts. Then the tank wall failed, and the molasses exploded outward into the street. This was not a slow spill. The surge rushed down Commercial Street, sweeping up debris, wagons, and people before they could react. It slammed into buildings, shoved structures off balance, and filled the streets so fast that escape windows were tiny. Some people were thrown into walls. Some were pinned under wood and metal. Some were carried toward the harbor with the wreckage. The force came from the sheer amount of liquid and the weight behind it, like a heavy moving wall that did not stop when it hit the first obstacle. Molasses made the disaster worse for a simple reason. It is heavier than water and it sticks. When people fell, it clung to clothing and legs and pulled them down. When people tried to stand, it resisted every movement and turned the street into a trap. A person who might push up in water could not move the same way in molasses. And then the winter air made it worse, because molasses thickens as it cools. Each minute made it harder to move, harder to breathe, and harder for rescuers to reach anyone stuck in it. The flood was not only dangerous in the first seconds, it stayed dangerous because it turned the street into a cold, sticky mass. Rescuers arrived quickly, but they struggled too. Boots got stuck, tools slipped from hands. Every step took effort because the surface was not normal ground anymore. People could see victims and still not be able to reach them fast enough. That is part of what makes this story brutal. It was not only about the surge, it was about how quickly life turned into a rescue scene where movement itself became the problem. Now the question everyone asks next is the right one. Why was there a massive tank of molasses in the middle of a city neighborhood? This was not for breakfast tables. Molasses was a raw material, and at the time it was money. A company stored molasses to produce alcohol. Molasses is basically concentrated sugar. Sugar ferments, and fermentation produces alcohol. Some of that alcohol became rum, but industrial alcohol also had major demand in that era. This was right after World War I, and industrial supply chains were still built around large-scale production and transport. Ships delivered molasses into Boston's harbor, it went into the huge storage tank near the waterfront, and then it was moved out to be processed. The tank existed because it made the whole operation faster, and faster meant profit. The tank gave warning signs for years. Neighbors saw it leaking, with brown streaks running down the seams. Complaints were common. People even joked about collecting the molasses that seeped out. That detail sounds funny until you realize what it means. A tank that holds millions of gallons should not leak as a normal condition. Instead of rebuilding the tank properly, the company relied on quick fixes and tried to make the problem less visible. The key point is simple. The danger signs were not hidden. They were tolerated, and they became part of the background of daily life. Right before the disaster, the setup got worse. The tank was filled close to its maximum. Fresh molasses had been pumped in, and the mix inside the tank could create conditions where gas formed from fermentation. Gas inside a closed, nearly full tank raises internal pressure. Pressure pushes outward against the steel walls, and a tank only survives that pressure if it is built and tested for it. Investigators later found serious problems with how the tank had been built and how it was handled, including the idea that the structure was not strong enough for the load it carried. Put it together and you get the recipe. A near-full tank, rising pressure, and a structure that was not strong enough. When the tank burst, the damage went beyond a sticky street. Metal and rivets flew, but the real destruction came from the weight and force of the molasses itself. It hit like a moving wall. It crushed what it reached. It damaged buildings and nearby structures. And it shoved heavy objects as if they were light. Then the molasses cooled and turned into an even worse hazard because it thickened and held people down. Rescue took days because victims were buried in thick molasses and debris. Some people were recovered quickly, others later, and some were carried into the harbor and found after the fact. Even when the surge was over, the situation stayed dangerous because the streets were still a trap. Cleanup took months. Crews used seawater and sand to break up and move the mess. But it spread everywhere because people tracked it on shoes and equipment. Think about what that means. It did not stay in one place. It went into doorways, onto steps, into buildings, and across work areas. People trying to help ended up carrying it outward. The city did not just clean a street. It dealt with a heavy, sticky flood that clung to everything it touched. Then came the blame game. After disasters, people look for a simple villain or a single dramatic cause. In this case, the company tried to point to sabotage, tapping into the political fears of the era. But that claim did not hold up. A major court case followed, and the company was found liable. It paid $628,000 in damages, which would be many millions today. The money matters, but the lesson mattered more. If a tank can leak for years in public view, then fail in a dense neighborhood, public safety cannot depend on a company choosing to do the right thing. Pressure grew for stricter inspection and construction standards, because the public should not be the testing ground for industrial risk. And that's why this story stuck in Boston's memory. Not just because it sounds absurd, but because it was real, it was deadly, and it was avoidable. Years later, locals still claimed that on hot summer days, the area sometimes carried a faint molasses smell. Whether that was literal or memory, the point lands either way. The event left a mark. So what do you think was the bigger failure? The tank being built wrong, or it being allowed to keep leaking for years?